Africa Command, which is headquartered in Stuttgart, Germany, has as its mission to counter transnational threats and malign actors, to strengthen security forces, and to respond to crises, all in order to help regional security, stability, and prosperity. So we do that first by approaching it as whole of government with our diplomats, with development and our USAID, and then of course with defense as well. And we look for regional stability, security, and prosperity. And of course, when we talk about strengthening security forces, it is to see which African partners, how we can help them strengthen their own security.
In terms of infrastructure on the continent, what kind of infrastructure do you have on the continent?
Yes, so we have no headquarters on the continent. We are focused in the east on the Al-Shabaab threat in Somalia. So we have a command, not Africom, but a subordinate command in Djibouti. And their mandate is to look at the Horn of Africa and to look for regional stability, security, and prosperity. And really what that means in the defense sector is helping the Somali National Army to combat Al-Shabaab. In the West, there are several bases in Niger, and they are focused on fighting the Al-Qaeda affiliate JNIM in the Sahel, and of course the ISIS cell in Sahel. So as we look at these two regions, it's about a counter-violent extremist organization fight. And that is really done through African partnerships, through the countries that are involved, their security forces fighting both Al-Qaeda and ISIS cells.
For some Africans on the continent, a few weeks ago, there was a heated debate around the role of Africom. The Secretary General of the governing party raising concerns of some of the opposition. If you were to elaborate to an ordinary African to understand and to appreciate the role you are playing in terms of assisting to bring stability, is there a need for such concerns? How do you take such criticism?
So first, we welcome it. I think it puts into question what we do, and we want to be transparent. We try to invite governments and military officials from governments to come to Stuttgart and familiarize themselves with what Africom does. I think it's controversial because it's not well understood what we do. I think what makes us different is we look at regional problems and we try to listen to our African partners to see where can we be of assistance, whether it's in the defense realm or whether it's in the development realm, and to come up and help solutions for security problems. And right now I'm thinking of West Africa in particular. And as we look at the spread of the Al-Qaeda affiliate, JNIM, it's very concerning. It started in northern Mali and is now spreading into Burkina Faso and will likely spread further. And so what we like to do at Africom is to visit those governments and the security forces and help them, assist them with what does a counter-VEO, violent extremist organization, strategy look like. And it is not just a defense or military solution. And I think that's very important. So when someone asks us, well, what is the role of Africa Command? I say it's bringing whole of government and bringing regional solutions to our African partners when asked.
In terms of the cooperation with countries on the continent, how will you describe the cooperation? Are you getting support? Are you welcomed?
Yes, we are. And of course, it differs regionally. In Somalia, President Hassan Sheikh Mohammed has asked for a lot of assistance, and he's done an amazing job at turning the clans against Al-Shabaab in central Somalia. So I think that's a very good benefit that we were able to assist with. In the West, I think some governments have been more slow in responding as a whole of government to the issues they have. And so when we talk to them, it's about bringing a different perspective. Unfortunately, we have many years of doing counterterrorism and counterviolent extremist fights. And I think we do bring some lessons learned in that arena. And what we try to do is share to our African partners what we see. And so we are welcomed not only from our lessons learned, but also when we look to support the capabilities of our African partner militaries and security forces, and really look at how can we improve, and of course, when asked, to come in to do that. Otherwise, we lead with diplomacy and we lead with development.
In relation to South Africa in particular, can you take us through the cooperation between yourselves and South Africa in particular, as you are currently in the country?
Yes. So I think South Africa is a huge strategic partner to the United States. We are its second largest bilateral trade. We have 600 U.S. companies in South Africa employing 220,000 South Africans. And of course, there's a history of sharing with South Africa. In terms of the defense sector, we do some exercises with South Africa. So we have shared accord that happened last summer in 2022, and it included medical veterinary services at Richards Bay. And it also looks to how do we help with humanitarian assistance. We would, of course, would love to increase the frequency and the quality of military-to-military engagements in South Africa. When I look at what South Africa has right on its shoulders to do, it's a regional security exporter. We look at the issues in Cabo Delgado, in northern Mozambique, and the ISIS cell there. I think when you look at ISIS cells throughout Africa, it's a formidable force. They learn from each other. They share financing. They share tactics, techniques, and procedures. And we hope coming in and speaking to the SADC contributing countries allows us to share the intelligence of what we've seen. ISIS is constantly changing, which makes it a formidable foe. And I think it's necessary to have that dialogue in order to fight the ISIS and Al-Qaeda cells that have unfortunately been growing in different regions of Africa.
Sharing intelligence is quite a sensitive matter. Now, to ensure that there are no concerns around the operations or the capabilities that you have and that you are willing to share with the region to combat those challenges that you spoke about, how do you ensure that this doesn't be, it's not seen as America encroaching on the territory of an independent region like Africa and independent countries?
Sophie, that's a huge concern. We do not go where we are not invited. And I think that's very important. You cannot impose, whether it's operations or intelligence, on a partner. So we go when we're asked. In the southern African region, we are not assisting, right, in northern Mozambique. We understand the EU does have a training mission there. The SADC forces do have their proper internal intelligence looking at the issues. What we see are the normal trends of what ISIS is doing in the DRC, in Somalia, in West Africa, in the Lake Chad Basin, at Sahel. And so what we're able to do is bring the overall view of what these cells are doing to complement the cell in Mozambique. So I think also we bring the viewpoint of what ISIS core is doing in Syria and Iraq. And we like to share that with the African partners that are fighting ISIS. In terms of sharing intelligence, it becomes very sensitive, as you have mentioned. I think what's important is, and what we're learning in West Africa is, if you have a common threat, that sometimes is the best galvanizing force to bring different forces together to share intelligence, to fight a common enemy. In terms of South Africa, I think what they're doing with the salmon forces in northern Mozambique has proven well to really fight the ISIS cell there. But I go back to the answer of we do not go where we're not invited.
You come ahead of the Women's Month in this country. In terms of women, what are you offering in terms of assisting women on the continent and sharing skills and information and capacity?
Yes. So women, peace, and security is a large part also of Africa Command. And I'm glad that I'm here right before National Women's Month in South Africa. First, let me say we have a lot to learn from women in South Africa. They have a long history of service in the SANDF. When I look at the percentage of women in the SANDF, it's closer to 24%. In the United States, we have 16% of women that make up the U.S. Armed Forces. And I think there's a lot there that we could learn from South Africa in terms of employing women in armed forces. What we do in terms of the other regions of, for example, in the East and in Kenya, we have a very robust women, peace, and security program where we look to our African partners to see how are they including women, not just in the security forces, but at the table, which I think there's a large body of evidence that shows when women are at the table during conflict and during resolution, it allows for peacemaking and stability. And so they're essential to the discussion and to conflict resolution. So not only are we supporting women in armed services in Kenya, but also in Somalia in the fight against al-Shabaab, there's certainly roles that women play in the security sector, in the stability sector, and of course, conflict resolution and really peacekeeping in many of the locations.
During the war or a conflict, women are the ones who are vulnerable, and children. What is your message to women on the continent, particularly at the moment where you have pockets of these challenges? You look at Sudan, you look at Cabo Delgado, as you pointed out, you look at DRC.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And I think we're very disappointed to hear in Sudan, gender-based violence is part of what some of the fighting forces are using to suppress not just women but different tribes, and it's a deliberate act during the fighting. What we can say is stand up. Your voice needs to be heard, and to articulate what is happening. I think we would not have understood what was happening in Sudan in terms of the gender-based violence if women were not speaking up and talking about being targeted specifically. Now, and as you mentioned, we see it in DRC, we see it in other regions. It starts with lending your voice to support. What we do at Africa Command is to come back and say to different governments, how can we help, right? What we'd like to do, obviously, is way before there is any conflict, looking at the development of women in the armed forces, learning from our African partners as much as we could share our lessons learned as well of women in our services. But of course, in order to do that, you have to increase frequency and really the quality of discussions in military to military engagements, and I hope we can do so more with South Africa.
From here, where to?
So I will go to Mozambique tomorrow. And of course, we're looking at the Cabo Delgado region. What we've learned in the military is it is important to take lessons learned, to see what works, what doesn't work. And I think what we've seen is just the success of the SADC forces in terms of working together in intelligence and operations. What I'd like to see is what can I take from this and bring it to our West African partners? What else can we do with Somalia and Kenya and Ethiopia in the East to fight al-Shabaab? And we were always looking for what has been successful. There's a lot of challenges, and we're looking at the best practices of different African militaries and security forces and pulling those lessons.
Taking into consideration the concerns raised by Africans in relation to this structure, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, and as you mentioned, if there is a concern about Africa Command, we would love to invite, right, different leaders of the security forces and militaries and governments to come to Africa Command, and we've done several of those. And it always goes back to we're all professional militaries. We need to really not base our views on things that we may be reading, but actually going and understanding and speaking to leaders of the command to say, okay, what do you do here, and how can we share those lessons learned, and what more can we learn from each other? I think Africa Command, we've realized we have a lot to learn from fellow African security forces and partners.